And I use technology not necessarily to replace certain techniques or certain learning, but I use it to enhance learning. This is not a replacement to our instruction. This is a reaction to a public crisis.
Hey, everybody, this is Aaron Noe with windconductor.org, and I'm really excited to introduce our next guest, Dr. Rine Zabanal. John, thank you for joining us.
Hello.
So John is the assistant professor and director of string music education at the VanderCook College of Music and in Chicago. John and I actually go way back to when he was a high school director. We taught together in Virginia, and I was always impressed with all the things that he did in the classroom. Great conductor, great music educator. And earlier we were talking about some of the challenges of remote learning in a performance-based setting. So I asked John to come on and talk a little bit about it. So John, thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yeah. So it's a tough time for everybody. And, trying to wrap our heads around what to do next. You've always been good with integrating technology into the classroom. And tell us a little bit about some of the techniques you used prior to this that you're going to, I guess, be incorporating more.
Well, I always considered myself technologically proficient. I mean, for a little bit, I was thinking of going into computers for a major field. But I decided that I liked music a lot more, so it's something that I've always used in my own daily life and something I use in teaching. And what's really interesting is trying to incorporate a very 21st century idea with instruments dating back from the 16th or 17th centuries. And that's always just so very, very, very interesting. And I use technology not necessarily to replace certain techniques or certain learning, but I use it to enhance learning. I know one of the big things that I've done was use performance videos, video assessments. And basically I just had students record videos of themselves so that I have something tangible to assess. And then I'd have my rubric and they'd upload it onto the cloud or onto Google Drive or on whatever learning management system your school uses. Like we used Canvas or Schoology, and I don't even remember what did they use back at Spotsylvania. Was it?
I think you were using the Google Classroom stuff because it was.
Oh yeah. There was Google Classrooms
Yeah.
too. But the neat thing was they all had a camera in their pockets. I mean, they used it during class, whether you wanted them to use it or not. So I just decided to take that and assign certain excerpts in the repertoire and say, this is what you have to record. Record your best video, record as many times as you want, and upload whichever ones that you consider to be your favorite, which is great because then they are recording as many times as they want, as in they're practicing.
Right.
Record your best video, as in they are self-evaluating. They're looking at and listening at the performance. And it's something that's tangible, something that I can view, something that I can refer back to in case someone asks me, or the student asks me, or their parent would ask me, why did my kid get this grade? Why did he get a B in music? And I can always refer back to my rubrics, and I could always refer back to that video. And it was also neat because I did it enough years where I'd had students from their first or second year playing the instrument. And then by the time they graduated, I had this whole portfolio of them performing excerpts from 6th or 7th grade on. And that's something that I could send to the student, especially if they didn't have that portfolio to begin with, or send to their parents for some posterity. And they can always refer back to it and say, hey, this is what you sounded like 4 years ago.
Yeah, that's
Here's
cool.
what you sound like now.
That's pretty awesome.
I always thought that was really neat. Yeah, that was very neat.
Yeah. So, we're dealing with schools being closed all over the U.S. I think the number of states that have mandated closings is up to, I think, over 35
Mhm.
states out of the union, which just amazes me. I mean, we've never dealt with anything like this in music,
No,
well, in our society at all. And what are your thoughts on music education and just open conversation about the next steps during this time?
with our students. I mean, the music teaching model, there are two basic models. There's the apprenticeship model, as in you find a master teacher and you take private lessons, and then you have that one-on-one instruction. Or you have the large ensemble model, which is you have a band, a choir, or a band, a choir, or an orchestra. Oh gosh. And one director, and that person basically leads the students, and you can still walk around, you can still listen live, you can assess the students in real time, and you can make adjustments as you need. And what we're doing here is we're taking away that person-to-person interaction
Yeah,
with these closures. We're taking away that interaction because of social isolation or a quarantine. And we have to figure out, all right, how can we teach these students without seeing them in person? And I know that many people prefer to have an in-person lesson, but the reality of it, that's probably the easiest thing to adapt to. And all you got to do is do video lessons, and there's already a market out for that. You know, my
right.
fiance, who's a flutist, she teaches someone that lives in Indiana on a weekly basis. And every now and then they're able to meet up. Eva comes to visit and then they have a lesson here. But typically she just does it online. What becomes a little bit more difficult is when you have group instruction, especially group instruction in a heterogeneous setting where you have, for a string orchestra, 4 different instruments, for a band, many more instruments, and you're trying to put it all together. And trying to have everyone paying attention at the same time or even meeting in the same time without accountability. And another issue is, with technology, there's a lot of distractions.
Yeah, yeah,
So we can't necessarily keep students accountable for not being distracted on an electronic device in front of them when they are at home in time of crisis. It's just
right.
hard to not be distracted. So I think moving forward, we kind of have to, of course, we have to be creative, but we have to think outside of the box from what it is that we are already used to so that we can keep some sense of normalcy in our own instruction and in the lives of our students, but also acknowledge some of the fallacies that instruction online has. It's a great resource, but it's definitely not something that we can count on all the time.
Yeah,
And that's assuming our students have the technology to begin with,
yeah,
or
and
the
that
internet.
yeah, and that opens up a whole nother topic because well, you teach in Chicago, and using that as a microcosm of the U.S. at large. I mean, think about the diversity
Mm-hmm.
of the socioeconomic spectrum just within, you know, your program with the students there. With if we look at Chicago Greater, I mean, you've got, what type of technology do these kids have when they go home?
Exactly.
Yeah, which kind of raises a question. As a music educator, how do you overcome that?
I I would think that it's being flexible. I mean, as music teachers, we're already thinking about students' accessibility to instruments. We talk about instrument rental, which is nothing cheap. We talk about acquiring or purchasing an instrument, which is also nothing cheap. And we talk about providing school school instruments to students. And that's something we can do. But if you don't have enough instruments to share, then students need to borrow something. Many students may have a cell phone, which is great, but many students might not have access to internet, or maybe their cell service is limited to 2 gigabytes a month.
Right.
Or maybe, let's say you have a family of 5 in a 2-bedroom apartment. There's nowhere quiet where that student can go and sit and study, let alone trying to follow through a class. And let's assume that that's assuming that that student doesn't have other siblings who also need to use that same technology.
Right.
So I think it's not having, I don't want to say have low expectations, but changing our expectations and acknowledging that we typically don't know what's happening in their lives. We don't know what kind of accessibility they have. We don't know if that's something that can be possible, but something that we should be flexible, as in maybe doing a flipped classroom type of deal, videotaping our lessons and keeping them short and concise, and then hoping that the student will be self-motivated enough to take the lessons from the flipped classroom, making ourselves.
So just, I just want to make sure we kind of cover the flipped classroom, because not every group may be familiar with that type of approach to teaching. And, I know there's a growing trend in the traditional classroom to kind of move to that flipped classroom. Describe that, I guess, in general terms, and how that would look in an ideal music situation, I guess.
Well, an ideal music situation is that instead of instruction happening in the classroom, instruction is happening at home. You record a video of a lesson, students watch that lesson, students work on the lesson on their own at their own time, and then you come to school, and then the teacher fills in the gaps, being like, what do you remember from the video? What questions do you have from the video? Then you can work with students individually to help improve or enhance their learning. Or maybe students are come back and they completely understand, and you can focus on working on a piece of music rather than the techniques that come with the music,
right?
Because they have that understanding. So what we're talking about here is videotaping a lesson, and videotaping in such a way and structuring it and sequencing it in such a way so where students can easily understand. And then making ourselves available, since we can't see them in person, making ourselves available to work with the student one-on-one, or maybe schedule a small group lesson to help answer any other questions.
Yeah. Which,
sorry.
Ahead. No, go ahead.
That way the students can, on their own time, whatever that may be, whatever works in their own family schedule, work schedule, or accessibility schedule, they can figure out, they can teach themselves that particular lesson.
Yeah. No, that's good. And, I was talking to a band director on Friday, Ed Prossman at Mason High School in Ohio, and he was talking a little bit about that when we talked. He was talking about, from a college perspective to a high school perspective, the chances of a high school director seeing their kids before the end of the school year is probably a little bit greater than what you're experiencing at the college level, because you guys typically end much earlier than the colleges. So he's preparing for the eventuality that he'll have those few rehearsals to put together some type of performance. And he's, discussed doing a score study and pulling out sections, sending images of the score and saying, clarinets, when we come to this section, you want to kind of think of this type of phrasing. You want to have this in mind as you practice, type thing, which is similar to what, No,
you're right. It does sound familiar. It's pretty much putting a lesson on video. And while there are other similar lessons on video, only we know our students, we know where they're at, and we know how to describe it in a language that they understand, because we taught them that language.
Right.
We already sequenced it. We know where they are. And in an ideal situation, we'd probably spend a good hour, 2 hours editing the video. But you don't. That's something that we don't really necessarily have to worry about. We just gotta record it and then get it done in a sense, because it's this is not a replacement to our instruction. This is a reaction to a public crisis, to where we have to disseminate the information that we need to so our students can be successful.
Yeah, yeah, that's good points. And which kind of brings up a whole other set of issues when we start talking about the reason why this is all happening.
Mm.
With, uh, you know, people are scared. They're afraid. How does that uh, affect the learning environment?
Oh, I think it affects the learning environment more than we want to admit.
Yeah,
I mean, for most of us educators, we, depending on where we are, if we're a teacher or a professor, we're lucky enough to have a school teacher, that is, we're lucky enough to have a form of salary. But let's say we're an adjunct of sorts that are paid class by class, or let's say that we're a private instructor, we're worried about the income or the lack of income that's about to come. So we as we're putting our lessons together, we're sorting out our own fears and we're sorting out our own anxieties. But as we record and interact with our students, we have to be aware not to impose those fears and anxieties on our students, because they don't know what's going on. I don't know what their parents or guardians are imposing it on them, but I'm pretty sure that they don't know what's going on. So for the students, this change in routine is different, but maybe they might not be as fearful as we are, because for them this is just a whole adventure.
yeah,
Because they may or may not realize the ramifications of this event. So I think a lot of people are very distracted, whether or not you're an instructor, an adult, or a student, or a college student, or a middle school student. It's where we're distracted and we're trying to carry out our regular lives with fewer interactions and without being stir crazy or having cabin
right.
fever. And then there's a whole, this could get into a whole different conversation. It's who do you listen to? Do you listen to your parents? Do you listen to your grandparents? Do you listen to the politicians? Do you listen to the doctors? There's a whole lot of information out there to sort through, and it's really distracting. And even though we may want to continue with the subject matter as teachers and as leaders in our students' lives, we should be aware that they're scared too, and we should have some kind of normalcy, and we should work to help calm them down, help use our talents, our skills, our knowledge of music to help calm them down and let them know that everything will be okay.
Yeah, no, that's and thinking about the type of impact that a teacher can have during this situation,
Mm-hmm.
because we don't, you said it earlier, we don't know what the home environment is. What is from whether that's a technology point of view or whether it's a socio-economic point of view, but also just what is the fear level within the home,
Mm-hmm.
you know? So
Oh yeah.
that's good. So I think we kind of recapped a lot of what you and I were talking about earlier and everything. What are if you had to give some advice to directors out there right now, what are some of the things you would just say to them?
I I make a transfer to something that I tell my current students who are teachers in training. we may think that our job is to teach Granger, to teach Mozart, to teach students how to perform an instrument. But at the end of the day, when we really think about it, our job as educators is to teach students how to be good people, to teach students how to be contributing citizens, to use our gifts and skills as music to teach students to be kind to one another. And I don't think that changes with this. I think we worry too much about, okay, how do I teach my class? How am I going to do this? How am I going to meet with them? How am I going to keep them accountable for what it is that I'm going to teach them? But at the end of the day, we're going through a crisis.
Right.
Our normal routines and the structures that we usually have no longer exist. And we have to remember to be flexible, to don't worry too much about the grade, to be the one thing in our students' lives, or the one person in our students' life that adds some kind of consistency, to continue teaching our students to be respecting people through music. And whether we're in front of them or not, that's just something that we just need to remember and to hold on to.
Yeah. Yeah. And what better place to stop than that? So, John, I do thank you for joining us, sharing some insights, sharing some encouragement, some ideas to think about flipping the classroom, and it's good. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Aaron. I appreciate it.
All right.